Well, there's a trick question which isn't very nice, is there? In which war did the Americans lose most men? And the answer is the Civil War.
In the Civil War, they were, that was between the North and the South. They were
600,000 compared to, which is not good at all. But you're of Chilean descent.
Correct. Yeah, you can tell by the accent.
So you went north because you wanted to be warmer because it's too chilly down there. Sorry.
No, I know. No. The truth is, I came here to study and then music. Like Christian and I, we know each other for now 40 years. So I think, like, when I arrived in the United States back in '86, not many groups were going to South America, so I was going crazy. I wanted to see Genesis, Pink Floyd, Depeche Mode, Led Zeppelin, and all this band were not touring to South America. Now everybody goes to South America. But
well, it was tricky because you had the aftermath of the Falklands War, and it was a bit notorious for if you got paid any money, it never left the country. It was pretty corrupt, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I couldn't see bands. So now I'm living the border with Virginia. I live in Virginia and the border with Washington, D.C. and Maryland. So every single band come here. So I'm very lucky because, with the pandemic, it's different, but I'm able here to see 30 to 40 gigs a year from different bands. Every band come here.
That's great. But a lot of bands are going to South America now, aren't they? A lot of bands.
Yeah, nowadays, now everybody goes there. But
Brazil and Argentina, but what about Chile? Do they go to Chile, man?
Well, hi, Anthony.
That's
a pleasure. Yeah, usually there are some promoters, some promoters that do Brazil, Argentina, and Chile.
You do Chile as well?
Yeah, that's the way it happens usually. But for example, Renaissance came to Brazil last year or 2 years ago, and I was very sad because nobody brought them to Argentina or Chile. Renaissance.
Just Brazil.
Just Brazil. And it has happened that way. And in the 80s, many people went to Argentina and never to Chile because they didn't want to come with, the government that we had here, etc., etc. Some people didn't come for political reasons, and some others just they were not invited.
Yeah, well, I guess over the last 20, 30 years, there have been some pretty dodgy regimes as well, haven't there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I gather the Argentinians call Bolsonaro the devil next door.
Yeah, they do.
I now call him Beelzebub.
Yeah.
Beelzebub.
Yeah. Well, it's so Chile is Santiago and Peru is Lima. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
All right. Let's start with making a formal introduction for the show, Anthony, and then the format that we have. I will ask some questions, then Christian will ask some questions, and you can ask questions as well. Very, very free form and freestyle, non-relaxed environment, no pressure whatsoever.
And what kind of station? I mean, do you deal with very specific kind of artists? Or are you quite a broad church, as we say?
Go ahead, Christian. Yeah, we have played your music. We play stuff from the Genesis, from Pink Floyd, the Depeche Mode, soft rock. We have 2 hours a week. We do a segment from Chilean music. We have another space on Sunday night that we do soundtracks, that kind of stuff. But we play the best music in the world in different ranges, if you will. So,
you do a soundtrack program
as well.
Yeah.
Because one of my favorite composers is the film composers, because I love film music, is the guy whose name I can never pronounce that did the music to Babel and various other films. What's his name?
Santolaya.
Yeah.
Gustavo.
Yeah, Gustavo. Yeah, he did Babel, didn't he? And a number of other things. I think he won an Oscar for Broken Mountain.
What's the name? Yeah.
Brokeback Mountain. But the music to Babel was amazing.
He used to be in a very good band, a classical band in Argentina. Yeah, Arcoiris, Rainbow. Yeah, it was a rock band in the 70s, and it was really brilliant.
Oh, because he uses a lot of. I mean, I use a lot of 12 strings and stuff like that, but he's using all these really interesting instruments. And I've got hold of a Ron Rocco, and I had a charanga before, but I just wanted to get more of that kind of timbre. I love the sounds he gets. It's beautiful.
Yes. All right. So
off we go.
Okay, so let me make a kind of formal introduction. From the studios in Fairfax City, we're very humble and grateful that Anthony Phillips accepted our invitation to our show. Anthony is an English musician, songwriter, producer, and singer who gained prominence as the original lead guitarist of Genesis from 1967 to 1970. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Very happy to be with you guys. Very happy indeed.
So this, I will start with the first two questions, then we pass it back to Christian here. This has been a very weird year for everybody with the pandemic. How has your the pandemic affected your creativity in terms of producing new material now that you cannot gigs or you cannot go out that much? How has it affected you?
Not being a touring musician, I've been one of the luckier ones because I've not really been affected by that. So I'm very, very fortunate. Also because as a composer, my music is royalty based and not commission based. So, you know, I'm making money from television programs and things that I did ages ago. Because I do a lot of what's called production music, or used to be called library music, which is stock background music for TV. So, you know, I'm making money from programs all over the world, and it goes, and people are using stuff from ages ago. So I've not been reliant on today, if you like, for, you know, a gig or for a commission. So, I mean, I've been very lucky. It's coincided with the time just after my mother sadly died, where I've taken over her house and partially moved out of London in the process, wanting to get away from London during the pandemic. And so I've been kind of taking over the house, sorting out stuff. So it's worked out well for me in a way that I've had that time to do it. I mean, it's not been easy because all the friends we normally see, all the people I love seeing, I can't see most of the time. My girlfriend's been stuck in Rome, looking after her parents who are over 80. So it's, you know, everyone has their own story. I consider I've been one of the luckier ones professionally, though, very, very much so.
Right, thank you very much. The next one, why did you join Genesis in 1967? You were very young. Did you have some family pressure to, for instead of forming a band, instead pursuing a college degree, go to university, like?
Well, the way it really went was this, was that I was in bands at my first school, and when I went to Charterhouse, which is where we all met, I teamed up with the sort of cream of the best musicians, which was, there was a drummer called Rob Tyrrell, a bassist called Rivers Job, who was at my previous school, and we got Mike Rutherford to join us. Mike played rhythm, I played lead, and we had a friend called Richard McPhail who sang. He later became Genesis well, he kind of looked after them and drove the van for years and years and years. So we were already doing all that. And we were, it was at the time where you would call it a covers band now. We were doing Beatles, Rolling Stones, Kinks, Animals, you name it. And Tony Banks and Peter Gabriel were quite a lot older. And they weren't in that kind of scene. But later on, when, you know, inevitably things move very fast, and it seems like an eternity, but it was only probably a year or so, that group faded out, started writing. I started writing with Mike Rutherford. We started experimenting with 12-string guitars in a kind of more, if I say classical, that's wrong, because we didn't think like that, but in a more timbral way, just experimenting with chords, not just strumming along, just like, you know, sound pictures and stuff. And we teamed up with Peter Gabriel and Tony Banks, who as a separate composing too. So we came together as like a guitar wing and a keyboard wing, because Pete wrote everything on piano as well as Tony. So that's how we came together. And then we had a sort of a succession of drummers after that. But that was how it went. I mean, you don't need me to tell you that the parents viewed all this with great suspicion, obviously. Although the early group, I think they were more worried about. Peter Gabriel was a very normal, stable guy. So was Tony Banks. They didn't do drugs and all the rest of it. You know, they were kind of normal, straight guys. So Peter Gabriel was nothing like the sort of he's very eccentric on stage, but he's a very Mr. Normal guy, natural off it. So I think my parents were quite kind of, you know, I'm in good company here. And because the guys were older, they were more sensible than me as well. So they were kind of a bit worried, but they were okay with it.
Okay, gotcha. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, well, Anthony, first of all, it's an honor to be talking to you. Thanks to Claudia, who invited me to this encounter. I've been a big fan of, you know, The Geese and the Ghost is one of my most beloved albums of all times. Yeah, yeah. And I was going to ask you, why do you think that it became, Geese and the Ghost became such an instant favorite to so many people, so millions really? It's such a lovely album, it sounds sweet music, and there's like a story behind with these canyons, these trumpets. It's like the Renaissance, I don't know, days.
Well, I mean, it's hard for me to analyze really, except I suppose that you had Mike Rutherford and I linking up together again and doing a lot of the soft lyrical side of Genesis, maybe some of which have got a little left behind as they progressed. They were doing some of it still, but there was a lot of heavier stuff as they had to do to command audiences on the road. I mean, we found when we were on the road, we had to ditch a lot of our acoustic material because nobody was listening. Whereas on an album like The Geese and the Ghost, we were able to do tracks like God If I Saw Her Now, Which Way the Wind Blows. And I mean, if you can imagine doing the first part of the instrumental The Geese and the Ghost on the road, people would have been throwing chairs and tomatoes at. Well, they just would have left the room because they couldn't hear it. So, yeah, so these things were practical on an album, but it wouldn't have been practical to have done to have a Genesis album like that, because they would have had to have perform it. So I think maybe what we were doing was giving people some of that softer Genesis side that had maybe got fallen by the wayside a little bit, because we were the two that were responsible for that guitar side. It was like one half of original Genesis, so obviously it was going to strike a chord. And also we were lucky that we were able to use as yet an unknown, pretty much unknown singer called Phil Collins singing two of the tracks. So the combination of all those elements, and maybe me pulling out some of the classical things I'd studied, so using a few more classical instruments, but not in a kind of pop band on one side of the stage, orchestra on the other. We did it kind of homogenizing. All the instruments were joined up in a natural way, so I think maybe people like that combination, and they love the artwork, and there was a kind of dreamlike quality about it, really, I suppose.
It is indeed. Yeah. So it's a fantastic album, like music and everything, as you say, and the box set was fantastic too.
Oh, so, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, there's something that obviously I've been reading a little bit. And then you mentioned that you had become weary and exhausted for a too harsh search for perfection within the band. So, like, you felt that the relationships were not coming out good. Like, before you left the band, and that you were like stressed. I don't know how it happened. If you could tell us a little bit about those days when you finally decided to leave.
Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately had, before we went on the road, I mean, I was only 17 when we went on the road. Before we went on the road, I had an illness called glandular fever, which I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it can be quite mild, but it can also be quite severe, and it can make you feel very tired and lethargic afterwards. And you're advised to take things very seriously and very sensibly, and live, healthy, eating, sleeping, and all that kind of stuff. So for at least a year and a half, and we went on the road, and of course we were not doing that because we didn't have much money, believe it or not. I know we were middle-class boys, but we were kind of, we were in the back of a drafty bread van up and down the country and sleeping on people's floors half the time. And I don't know whether that contributed or not, but I got pretty run down, and I started getting really chronic stage fright. I mean, there's a difference between feeling a bit nervous about going on stage and getting chronic stage fright. And I think the atmosphere in the group was pretty serious. Everyone was very, very determined to be successful. So there was a kind of a big feeling of mutual reliance and pressure. And I found that the pressure started to really get to me, actually. And, you know, I began to dread going on stage. I mean, I've since, unfortunately at the time, this was a very novel thing to me and it was frightening, but I've since realized, you know, reading and talking to actors and some sportsmen as well, that this is quite a common, it's a very common thing. But unfortunately, I was too young and I wasn't really able to talk to the others about it. So, I mean, my leaving was really to do for health reasons. I think that what happened within the personalities of the group is really a separate thing. It probably didn't help, but I mean, what really happened within the group was that we ended up with quite a fearsome touring schedule. And as you know, the Genesis music was not, at this stage, was quite complicated. So to rehearse a new number and to get it into real sort of battle conditions was going to take, you know, a couple of weeks or days and weeks. And we didn't have that time. So our set began to be the same. So the music got very repetitive and we lived in the same place and we didn't get enough breaks from each other. We lived on top of each other. Imagine all living in the same place all the time, never getting away from the people you work with. However much you like them, it's probably not a very sensible idea. We were a bit young and idealistic. So I don't think it was the search for perfection. It was a combination of health, but all the relationships in the groups became a bit frayed because we were working too hard and living on top of each other. This is the most natural human manifestation, really. But my decision to leave was not based on any personality clashes or the search for perfection. I mean, what is perfection?
Now, Anthony, about this, I'm going to jump into today now. I've been reading about strings of light. What about this never-ending creative longing of the artist? Obviously, if I were a musician, if I were a musician myself, I would be probably trying to make music until I cannot make it anymore. So, how come? Where does the energy come from?
I think you'd have to ask. I mean, all sorts of different people in artistic forms of ways of life to get an overview. But I think that most people would say that it's a compulsion. You know, it's how you get through the day. Not every day, but you need it to express your feelings. Some people go out and exercise. Other people go out and maybe smash a milk bottle. Other people go out and do all sorts of bizarre things. But I think if you're able to use music or whichever artist it is of a way of getting through difficult times, expressing frustration, sadness, longing, whatever, I think you're a lucky person. And so I'm able to do that. It's almost as if it won't let me alone. It is a compulsion. I mean, they say music is a harsh mistress. It won't let you alone. And for a lot of artists, you know, visual artists, they paint till they drop. There are cases of composers stopping. I think Sibelius stopped, and I think Rossini famously took up cooking instead of music. But these are rare. Most people keep going till they drop. You can't stop. It's like a drug.
It is.
It's part of your life, part of your lifeblood. It won't leave you.
Well, the same for us fans. We cannot stop listening to. You know,
oh, that's nice.
Yeah,
that's nice.
Yeah. Claudio, you want to go?
Yeah. On? So between what I don't know, it's kind of weird question. Between 1917, after you decided to leave the band, and 1977 with the Geese and the Ghost, how you make a living? How were you teaching? Were you doing seminar? Well, how you went back home after?
Well, yeah, I remember I was only 18 when I left the group, so yeah. I was at the age where I was going to go to university, where obviously there wouldn't, you know, no need to have wouldn't have had to earn a living there. So I went back for a few years to live with my parents, and I studied music. And because I was studying music, obviously my parents were happy to support me. I didn't have a rich, lavish lifestyle. I didn't go down to the pub and drink lots. I wasn't doing lots of, you know, other things, you know, expensive things. I had quite apart from my outlay on music, I had a pretty sort of, you know, just regular kind of lifestyle. So it wasn't expensive. So quite quickly, as I was studying, I started teaching. So I was augmenting my study with teaching and the odd part-time job as well. And the period actually, of course, it's because the Geese and the Ghost came up when it did. People look at this sort of 7-year gap, but actually that's an illusion, because I mean, I left him at the end of 1970, August 1970. By August 74, we were already recording the first part of the Geese and the Ghost and had been planning it all that year. And Mike and I remember writing extra stuff in a hotel in Southern Ireland at Christmas 1973. So it was probably only 3 years I was really kind of out of it. In fact, even in 1970, towards end of 1972, early 1973, I was starting to do things with Mike Rutherford and Phil Collins as a three. So there wasn't this kind of long period where I was doing different things. I had a sort of 6 months of wandering a bit. Then I picked it up. I learned how to read music. I studied classical guitar to get extra stuff on board. I studied orchestration because after a bad experience with Genesis, I wanted to make sure I knew how to be able to handle orchestra, at least up to a point. So, and I think that probably helped with the Geese and the Ghost, because I mean, I did the string arrangement on Collections, for instance, which I mean, there's no way I could have done that at the time in the group. So all that stuff was time well spent, but the frustrating period was the period after doing the Geese and the Ghost. Well, first of all, Genesis did a double album of The Lamb, and that took away some of the time that we were going to spend, Mike Rutherford and I. So there was a gap. 1975, we then finished it off, but it didn't get released for about 18 months. That's one of life's mysteries. Don't ask me to explain what happened there, but it wasn't an easy time, obviously, having spent all that time building up to this album and getting back into the business. It seemed to kind of miss out somewhere along the line. People, you know, the Geese of the Ghost very nearly never came out.
Wow.
That's a bit of a shocker, isn't it?
Yeah.
It kind of missed. It had people saying, this is great, why aren't they releasing this? But record companies weren't seeing it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I'm quite sure between whatever, 73 and 77, although you were working with Mike Rutherford and Phil, I'm quite sure they were calling you, hey, you want to come back? We want to do this tour, and you already decided not to go with them again and began writing stuff on your own. And
no, there was no question. No, I think once you leave Genesis, you're out. You don't get back in again.
Well, really, yeah.
No one was asking me to do stuff. No.
And then the other question is, I researching and I came across an album that you did in '81 with Andrew Latimer of Camel, which is a very, very, very good piece. It's and there was 81, 4 years after the release of Geese and the Ghost. Very, very good album. I really like the stuff. You want to elaborate a little bit how the album came about?
It's funny actually, because you're telepathic, because I was thinking about that actually when you said nobody asked me about Genesis. I was thinking, but I did get asked to join Camel. I mean, when the old Camel fell apart and Andy was looking to go in a different direction, I didn't know him and I didn't know their music very well, but I got to know him through our mothers knew each other, and I'd moved to London and he lived very close to me and we got on fantastically well. I mean, I went over and played him loads of my stuff, but I think the problem for Andy was that he had to my stuff was in a quite different style to Camel, and he had to keep the Camel style much more in a certain direction. So some of the stuff we tried, although it was nice, didn't work out, but we did actually have to shelve a few tracks. But I mean, I was mainly as a session musician on that album, playing both piano and 12-string and some other keyboards as well. There was one track we did which was it's a shame actually, because no one's ever going to hear this, I don't think. We did a track because the last piece, it's called End Piece, isn't it, that we did together? But there was another piece which was kind of quite a sort of like a rock ballad, but powerful, but instrumental, big chords, but the album title gives it away. There was so much pressure by that point on all of us to go poppy again and try and pretend we were 18 or 20 again. It was silly, really. That's what happened after punk, I'm afraid, is that anybody doing anything that could be seen as being classical or too complicated. She wasn't called prog or progressive in those days. That term came later. But that kind of music was very unfashionable. I'm sure you know the story. In 77, 78, bands like Yes found themselves having tomatoes and things thrown at them when they were playing. There was an incredibly nasty backlash. Very, very nasty. It was vicious, and it was a bit embarrassing, really, because there was some good punk stuff, but a lot of it was pretty dire, and everyone was kind of running scared because these guys were so aggressive and powerful, and the record companies were falling over to embrace these guys, and at the same time kind of knifing some of the other artists in the back, they've been supporting. So there were some people with a lot of shame, I think, who shouldn't be sleeping well now about how they treated some people. But it gave Andy no choice but to go in a more single orientated direction. And indeed, I did an album after that called Invisible Men, because I just bought a house and I had a mortgage to pay, and nobody wanted any more Geese and the Ghosts, not a bit of it. They wanted pop songs.
That's right.
It was a struggle because what was easy, what was natural when you were 15 or 16 suddenly wasn't natural at 28, 29 anymore. So it was all a bit ridiculous, to be honest. But yeah, no, working with Camel was great, but I wasn't going to go on the road, and that was obviously going to be a limitation anyway.
Yeah. All right, great. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, well, Anthony, I would like to ask you about Orion. I'm a big fan of Synergy, Mr. Larry Fast, and I'd like to know how you got involved in the label that where you released some of your electronic albums back in the late 80s, must have been, Orion.
Sorry, which label was that?
Orion. Larry Fast's Fast label.
Well, I was with an American company called Passport, and they had a subsidiary label which Larry was involved with. I got to know Larry pretty well. A very nice guy. He played with Peter, I think, early on, didn't he?
He did.
And a couple of the electronic albums got released through them. I did an album called 1984, which I'm not sure if you're aware of, but that confused a lot of people because I was known as Pastoral 12-string, but nobody wanted Pastoral 12-string anymore. So it was a kind of compromise. I remember thinking, well, if I go futuristic and have a rhythm going the whole way through, but then maybe kind of try and do some nice chords and impressive stuff on top, maybe I'll fool them. Maybe they won't say this is it's pathetic rubbish. So that was the reason behind that. But Orion wasn't a sort of a big career change or anything. It was just they just put out certain of the albums. Unfortunately, Passport went bust though in the early 90s or late 80s, and that left me in a lot of trouble because I couldn't get my records released in America for quite a while after that. Because the company went into, what is it called, Chapter 7 or Chapter 9? I can't remember. It's one of those things where they come in and nab all the assets of the company, and of course my albums went into sequestration, I think is the right word. So I couldn't release albums in America for about 4 or 5 years, only import. It made life very, very difficult.
Then going back in time again, Anthony, Sides for me was a big change. A big change. Sides that even has like pop songs. There's a song that I remember having played on radio, and it was totally different from the Parts of Peace series. How did you conceive that album?
Well, I think again, you just got to look at the process. You know, Geese the Ghost is conceived, written, recorded, forged before punk. Punk comes in, the whole record industry starts going through a complete U-turn. We don't want to hear any classical, long, rambling pieces. Nothing dramatic and grand and all the rest. We want angry young men doing pop songs. So that was, as with Andy Latimer's Single Factor, that was the pressure. So, and twice after the event, I was told do songs. Those songs were a little bit more elaborate. They were a bit more lyrical. But by sides, when Wise After the event hadn't been a commercial success, by sides, I was put under a lot of pressure. If you want to keep this record deal, you've got to come up with pop tunes. Yeah. And you know, it was difficult because Rupert Hine, my dear producer, we were, you know, we had a lot of choices. I had a big long synth piece, I had a big long 12-string piece, but we had to can the whole lot and just go for these songs. Now, I'm not ashamed of some of those songs. I mean, there's some I'm not particularly keen on, but I'm not that ashamed of them because it wouldn't be right. Because I know that, you know, I have some fans that are big fan. They love sides, and I remember a few people saying sides got me through my A-level exams and stuff like that. So it would be wrong for me to turn around and say, well, no, it's rubbish, isn't it, mate? But I was at least lucky in that the second side was able to be more instrumentals. But I don't know if you know this, but one of the album was initially going to be called Balls because of the football table on the front. It was going to be called Balls because the cliche was going at the time of punk and just afterwards, if they listened to your music, I mean, can you imagine listening to something like God If I Saw Her Now, and then a guy saying this, they'd listen to it and they'd say, no, mate, hasn't got enough balls in it. Hasn't got enough balls in it. So I got so pissed off with this. I thought of taking a Mickey, and we were going to call the album Balls. And that's why Peter Cross did the football table. But then the record company said no. So we had to find a title that had 5 letters. Had to be 5 letters to fill it in the gap he had in the cover. So we had to make it sides instead of balls. Yeah. And Arm&R, the song Arm&R was a piss take at the A&R men. A&R men are the guys that decide the repertoire in the record companies. And often they don't have a clue what they're talking about, and they just sit there with a tracksuit jangling coins around and talking shit. And so yeah, it was a really angry anti-record company commercial song. People thought it was anti-establishment, like I was being a bit punkish. No, I wasn't. I was registering my. Actually, they also think The Knife on the Genesis song, The Knife, is a genuine revolutionary song. It wasn't. It was a piss take on revolution. It was a piss take on the revolutionists. So Peter Gabriel's not a revolutionary. I hate to disappoint you.
Well, he has his own revolution fighting for, you know.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yes. Now, one more. Shall I call you Ant? Do they call you Ant? Yeah. Okay. Now, how did you get into electronics? Because I really love this 1984 album. I really love it. And most of your fans maybe were amazed to see you getting into these electronic landscapes. And then I became familiar, well, I'm talking about the mid-90s really, with albums like Finger Painting, where you got into this music for TV. That was a very interesting and unexpected stage in your career, for me at least.
Well, remember, I'd studied piano to, not a high classical standard, but to a reasonable standard for rock. And so it just did seem, having done these sort of mainly guitar-based albums, because sides there were keyboards, the songs like Bleak House and stuff, but it seemed to make sense to try and do something, given that by this stage it had to be home recording. You know, I had no record company at this point, so I had to think of a project that I could do that was potentially going to be something that a record company would put out. If you ask me how I really came up with the idea, I don't really know. It was partly what was practical, which was, you know, I had a limited amount of electrical equipment, and I knew that doing 12-string music was going to be a waste of time. No one was going to put that out. They didn't want to hear Geese the Ghost type lyrical, poignant songs. So I thought, well, things are getting a bit harder edged here, so maybe go futuristic. And I got to be honest with you, I much as I love guitar and 12-string and all the rest of it, I love synthesizers and love the sounds, you know, and experimenting with all the sounds, all the interesting sounds was great fun. I mean, really, really lovely, actually. And so kind of weaving, I had a lot of, it was the old thing of I wrote lots and lots of different sections, then I tried to piece them together to see what would make sense and try and get a flow. I was helped by a regular friend of mine called Richard Scott, who would come down and listen to the various developments and see how it went. But it was a kind of it's an album which I would say it had no roadmap. You know, there wasn't like any other album. So every turn you made was like, hang on, is that the right one? You know, there was no signposts. There was all a bit of a shot in the dark. My manager famously, Tony Smith, you know, who obviously managed Genesis, Pete, and then Phil, very successful. He memorably came over when I'd finished it after about 6 months, listened to the whole album, and just said, "It works," and left. He said nothing else. He just said, "It works." That was it.
Okay. Now, going back in time again a little bit again about the days of the Anon and I read about some convenient concerts at Charterhouse where you had many possibilities of doing sports, having fun, and then you found a place to play music. Do you have some like best memories of those days, the Anon and the Charterhouse?
Yeah, I think for most people, the early days, when you're discovering stuff, it's got to be so exciting, hasn't it? I mean, you haven't got the professional pressure you get later. Okay, you're not. You know, obviously, if you win awards and all the rest of it, it's great and stuff later. But there's nothing like the thrill when you're starting out because you're naive. You've got no responsibility. Anon, we used to go and practice in the dank cellar in one of the houses. They had all these cellars downstairs. I don't think the masters knew we were doing it. And so playing in this small room with, you know, with the sound reverberating around us, it was exciting. It wasn't like playing in a big room, and the amps were quite small. So, and given we were playing these really driving Rolling Stones songs, it was really, yeah, it was just, and there was something in those days when you hero worship people, being able to play their songs convincingly. And we were the best group in the school, you know. So actually we had not star status, but people did look up to us a bit. So when it came to do some of the bigger concerts, to, you know, sometimes 300 or 400 boys there, maybe more than what some of the Genesis gigs. It was fun. Yeah, it was really fun. Really enjoyed it, I have to say.
Okay, thank you.
I was looking at your discography, and you are unbelievable, so prolific in terms of compilation, you know, solo album, private part and pieces. And I want to show you a couple of them that, well, I have a lot of stuff for you, but this one with Andrew's kid.
Oh, you like? All right.
Of course. And this, in my opinion, that's one of the best stuff you have done, according to me.
Oh, you feel that? You like that?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Unbelievable. So where, like, similar to the question that Christian asked, where does the inspiration come from? I know that you cannot, as a musician, I suppose, you cannot put the guitar away in your closet for a week, right?
Yeah.
You can put you can say, well, I want to do some work in my mom's house, fix it out, call some people, you know, answer Claudio's email. But eventually you go back 2 days after, you pick up the guitar again, right? But just the fact that you pick the guitar, that you have an instrument or a piano, whatever, still you can do terrible music or great music like you have. So where the inspiration come from? It's like I suppose it like a writer, right? If they're forced by